moving on next, and it's going to be quite a switch of our gears here. Because we have been talking about, we went from Middle East to Taiwan, we went from technology towards electric scooters, but we'll do a frame shift here a little bit. And we're going to talk about agriculture, water, and energy. Again, something that is for the core, for sustainability, for the earth, and everything else. It's extremely important. And the next panel is going to discuss from knowledge to action, the AWE Nexus. And I'm going to have Mr. Hemendra come in and introduce himself, introduce his panel, and take it away from here. And we'll have an awesome next half an hour, I'm sure. Hemendra, on to you.
Thanks, Balaji, and thanks to the entire TIE team for inviting us to this panel. And it's such an interesting topic, agriculture, water, energy nexus. And I'm very fortunate to have some very good panelists on this who are very knowledgeable and experienced in this sector. Let me briefly introduce the panel. We have Apoorv Khandelwal, who's joining us from Council on Environment, Energy and Water. The Council has done phenomenal amount of work in sustainable agriculture, and I'm sure Apoorv is going to talk about that. We have Rajul Patkar. She is the founder of Proximal Soil Sensors startup, which has developed sensors and IoT devices, especially meant for water use efficiency in agriculture. And then we have Jiten Ghilani. Jiten is the CEO of Promethean. Promethean, as you would know, is a startup which has developed a proprietary technology for cooling, chilling, and it's widely used in India in the dairy supply chain. So welcome all the panelists to this panel. A brief introduction about myself. I work as venture partner with Bharat Innovation Fund. It's an early stage deep tech fund. And personally, I invest a lot in the food and agri sector, especially in startups. So with that, let's get started. And let me just take 2 minutes to set the context when it comes to AWE Nexus. If you look at agriculture in general, it's clearly the two very important inputs is water and energy. 80% of the water which is being used in India goes into agriculture. So you can just imagine the amount of water consumption in this sector. And so is energy. I think energy is also used across the food value chain, not just in the crop production, but also in post-harvest, storage, cooling, processing, all the way to distribution and retail. So these are two extremely important inputs into the agricultural ecosystem in India and elsewhere. And that's why it's very important to understand, how do we drive efficiency? As we all know that India continues to be the world's most water-stressed countries. And clearly the cost of energy is also going up. So to make agriculture more climate resilient, sustainable, efficient, and productive, I think these are two very, very important components that needs to be, optimized in the entire food value chain. And fortunately, we are seeing a lot of innovations happening. The whole agri-tech ecosystem, it started about 5 to 7 years back and has been shaping up very well. Of course, a lot of models continue to drive supply chain efficiency, farm to fork linkages, etc. But there are startups which are exclusively focused on how to optimize the use of water and energy. So I think we have a pretty good set of innovators in the ecosystems who are driving the agenda. And of course, then we have think tanks like the CEW, which Apoorv is representing today. So maybe I can start with Apoorv with my first question. Apoorv, what kind of challenges and opportunities are there in enabling a sustainable water, energy, agri-food water ecosystem in the country?
Thank you, Hemendra, and thanks, Ty, for this opportunity for speaking here. Nexus is a very broad topic. So indeed, I would want to focus on two key levers in the Nexus and then focus on challenges and opportunities there. So one is the sustainable agriculture that Hemendra, you mentioned. Another, I would say, is decentralized value addition in agricultural value chains using or capitalizing upon decentralized renewable energy technologies. So let me start with the the sustainable agriculture one, which is again a broad concept. In fact, in our research, we have come across 80 plus definitions of what sustainable agriculture is. But for this particular discussion, let us just define very quickly. Sustainable agriculture is basically set of farming activities and agricultural practices that use resources in a very efficient way, and resources would include water and energy and other ecosystem services that are economically remunerative for the farmers, as well as those practices and systems that are environmentally benign and climate resilient. And what are those practices? So basically, mulching or crop cover, intercropping, mixed cropping practices, contour farming. So these are the practices. Systems we keep on hearing is natural farming, permaculture, sustainable rice intensification, precision farming. These are all the keywords that we keep on hearing. And all these can be seen as a bunch, as a set of sustainable agriculture and practices and systems. The challenge is that the sustainable agriculture is still very far away from being mainstream. So in this report that we recently launched on sustainable agriculture in India, we note that none of the 18 practices or systems we studied has scaled up beyond 4% of the India's farmer base. So then that simply means, one, it is difficult, but also there is a big opportunity which can be leveraged upon. And I think entrepreneurs and private sector can do a lot in changing those challenges into opportunities. So let me list a few. One is these sustainable agricultural practices are very labor intensive. So all the mechanized solutions that exist have been really focusing on the conventional agricultural methods, so monocropping, etc. So your tractors, your harvesters. But a big challenge towards moving to sustainable agriculture is how we can make sustainable agriculture more easy and less, reduce the drudgery in sustainable agricultural practices. So can we make weed removal and harvesting for intercropped or mixed crop settings more mechanized? Can we make input production more mechanized? Second is all these sustainable agricultural practices are very knowledge intensive, and that means that so that means the opportunity is can private sector extension systems or emerging organizations or entrepreneurs such as Digital Green or other ICT based organizations can come in and enhance the way farmers are engaged and their capacity is built. The third one I want to point out is around lack of service providers for enabling the transition towards sustainable agriculture. So variety of different sustainable agriculture practices such as organic farming, natural farming require a very unique set of inputs, biofertilizer, etc. Still, it is very difficult for these farmers to actually get hold of these inputs and other services which are necessary. So can entrepreneurs and private sector jump in and then create that service provision ecosystem? Maybe another one, there's the impact or the influence of entrepreneurs, maybe private sector is limited, but we must be cognizant that the policy ecosystem needs to also be more aligned in driving sustainable agriculture. Currently, around 0.8% of India's Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare's budget goes to National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. So that needs to get more aligned and send the right message to the industry. So overall, I think these are some of the challenges that we have come across very clearly and have scope for private sector and entrepreneurs to jump in and transform into opportunities. A quick mention, I must mention about the decentralized value addition opportunities that are there, because a lot of value addition in agriculture happens in a centralized manner. So if it can be decentralized, not only we create more livelihood opportunities for the rural population, but also the supply chains become more resilient and more local, and also more environmentally positive. And if that can especially happen using decentralized renewable energy based solutions. So I'm talking about solar based cold storage or solar based food processing. In one of the reports in 2018 that we released, we noted that around 43 lakh micro enterprises in agri and in rural India have noted that they are struggling with unreliable electricity, and this was one of the top 2 challenges that they had quoted in the national sample survey in 2015. What does that mean? Is basically there is a big untapped market for enabling such solutions which can use decentralized renewable energy and make the access to energy more reliable for such MSMEs that are ready to be unleashed. So, in fact, the market sizing we did estimates around 50 billion USD opportunity for such enterprises in the rural part of India. So let me stop here. A few keywords I've thrown out, and hopefully looking forward to more discussion.
No, thanks very much. I think some very important points you mentioned. 4% adoption by farmers of sustainable agriculture practice. I think that's a number we need to look at for any intervention from a policy perspective and from an entrepreneur perspective also. I think that's a very important point that you mentioned. I'm so glad you talked about decentralized processing, storage. I think that's the way forward. I personally believe that. I think that is so critical, and I totally with you in terms of the size of market that you mentioned. I think one important thing which I learned that for it to be successful, you need to build market linkages. Otherwise, a lot of these facilities which you create at the village level, if they are lying unutilized for a significant part of the year, the models start failing. But fortunately, I think with the way supply chain is moving, especially the digitization that we see in the food supply chain from farm to fork, hopefully those market linkage combined with decentralized processing, storage, makes a very interesting business case as the situation is evolving. And that's where I want to bring Jiten, who has a lot of experience in this space, especially set up hundreds and thousands of these chilling and cooling stations across the country for milk and some other parts of the world. Jiten, it'll be good to understand from you, what is your view, what Apu mentioned in terms of opportunity for decentralization. And if you can also talk about how Promethean, with its proprietary tech, driving energy efficiency, especially in rural areas where we don't have electricity available. Jiten, over to you.
Thanks, Hemendra, and really glad to be part of this panel. I think it's a very timely discussion and a lot of challenges and changes affecting the sector today, as you pointed out. And Apurva, some of your comments regarding the opportunities for decentralization are really what motivates some of the work that we do. And what we believe is that bringing access to refrigeration and cold storage near the source can unleash great opportunities and better livelihoods, empower smallholder farmers, and build a more resilient and sustainable agri supply chain. So while we have started as a solar milk chilling technology company, moved to solar cold storages, thermal storage based technologies, more recently we've identified a significant opportunity for more of an ecosystem led approach. As Hemendra pointed out, any individual infrastructure alone without market linkage and or other proper ecosystem players will not be viable. And so what we've started to do and what we've identified, I think, is a great opportunity forward is to build partnerships with important players in the ecosystem who can really bring technology and value to small and marginal farmers in rural India. And so one example of that that we're seeing is our deployment of micro milk chilling and micro cold room technologies that are well suited for rural villages where power is very unreliable, but is available. And so what we can do is store power for whenever it's available, up to 4 to 6 hours of power, which is sufficient to operate a cold storage for an entire day. And what this can do then is be a key enabler to bringing on other ecosystem partners and driving primary processing, collection, grading, sorting, and perhaps further value addition. And so we are working with a variety of companies, large food companies, small food companies, and also directly with NGOs and farmer groups to drive new technology adoption into a sort of first mile infrastructure ecosystem. And I think what I'd like to point out is the solutions are available, whether they're Promethean solutions or other company technologies. But what we need to do is develop more cluster-based approaches with the right ecosystem partners, sufficient demonstrations so that we can show the value across the value chain in terms of improvement in incomes, improvement in sustainability, reduction in carbon emission, and also how this can really set India's food supply chain ready for the future. If you build in other elements such as traceability and bring in cooling, especially at the farm gate, you can really deliver opportunities for greater value addition, greater opportunity for exports, and really a more future-ready food supply chain. And so I think this conversation is really exciting. I'll pause here, but I think the sentiment I'd like to share is if we can develop more models where we bring first mile infrastructure to the farm gate, prove to the keys to success, those models can be replicated across India to really drive the value that everyone is trying to bring to smallholder farmers who are going to be a major component of our food production for the foreseeable future. And any tools that we can provide to them to help them be successful will be in everyone's interest in terms of resilience, food security, and sustainability.
Thanks, Jiten. You also touched on very important point on technology being an enabler, but you need the larger ecosystem. And good, you're talking about the partnership with local NGOs and dairy companies, and so I think that is so critical for any of these solution to scale. You can't just push tech on its own. You need the entire ecosystem to support it, and especially in agriculture, the local ecosystem plays such a huge role. All said and done. So I'll come back to Jiten for a few more questions. I'll probably go to Rajul now. Rajul, we would love to hear about what work you're doing at Proximal Soil Sense. You've done phenomenal work in water use efficiency, developing sensors, IoT devices. So just talk about the work you're doing, and if you can also talk about how technology can solve the challenges that we see in making agricultural supply chain sustainable, especially from the water perspective, because that's the area you know the best.
Okay. Thanks, Tai, and thanks, Hemendra, for inviting me for this panel discussion. So it's good to know Apur, meet Jiten and Apur here and learn about their work. But I think taking cue from what Apur has spoken earlier regarding sustainable agriculture, because for me, I feel that water use, if there is no water, there is no agriculture. So the water use efficiency becomes very, very important in the agriculture. So when we started at looking at two important things. One was the water use efficiency, and otherwise the side effects of like when we are not using water efficiently, what happens, and that kind of nutrient leaching and all other. So those are the problems we started looking at SoilSense. So our SoilSense all started as a research work at IIT Bombay, and then we took it. And so your SoilSense, you can say, is a spin-off from IIT Bombay. So we built. So one thing which we realized, I saw when Apur also spoke about 4% adoption of any kind of agriculture practice. So here, if in India we see that, okay, 85% of our farmers are small holding farmers. So to make any solution or have agriculture sustainable or any kind of solution, if we only build a technology which is only for those 15% and not for those 85%, our numbers will always remain small, and whatever we try to do, it will never go up. And one thing which we all know, and across the world, across the globe, that technology can help solve many of these problems of over irrigation or water use efficiency. But the technologies which, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. If I had to bring up that startup, since I am representing a startup and the technology for the farmers and the innovation and efficiency. When you build a technology, the technology has to be adopted by that majority, 85%. Now, here the problem is that if the technology is built and if a startup has to be also sustainable, there is somebody who has to pay for the technology cost. Now, the smallholding farmers, they're already so stressed out. You can't expect them to actually take something new. So it is either government's initiative, or is it some CSR foundation or something else, or maybe the people who are actually subsidizing the electricity to the smallholding farmers. They can actually take percentage of whatever subsidies they are actually giving in terms of electricity, can actually be routed to the technology adoption. Then the technology adoption can happen. This is what I feel, that innovations, technologies, everybody can build. But then how do you take it to those things where the percentage of numbers, what Apur was talking about, is actually not 4%, but it becomes 40% and slowly higher. So that is where the thing is. And other thing which also we need to know is that if we want to develop any technology, these small farmers, or maybe the livelihood, something has to improve there. They should see the the value in the product. So any technology you build, if that can be not only, I mean, I'm talking about agripreneurs or entrepreneurs at a village level. So if they can use these technologies and take it to their farmers as either as a service, even if the moisture sensors, for example, we started with a system which was kind of a globally accepted kind of a solution with multiple sensors, a stationary with a network communication, and you use that technology, you save. So we have actually demonstrated that using such a technology at an affordable cost, we could show the saving in water. But then again, the numbers will remain small, because if we are only targeting those 15% of the farmers. So then we actually modified that technology to a model, or I would say to a product and a model, where these technologies can be used by multiple farmers. A single system can be used by multiple farmers, and multiple farmers can push their data to the cloud. And then that using that data, the experts can give advisory to these farmers. So that is what SoilSense is trying to do. And so that the percentage of numbers of these farmers adopting the technology increases. So that is one aspect, I think, from a SoilSense side, we are really trying to do. And the other thing is, we are also trying to look at some models where these agripreneurs can use this technology. We are also building sensors for nutrient, because just in terms of water, we cannot talk. We have to have the water, nutrient, and then the whole crop productivity. Everything is so interrelated here. We cannot talk about water, and water is connected to energy. Energy, if this is again connected to productivity, productivity to nutrients. So there are so many interconnection links. So that is what I would like to speak about, and then further we can talk. So thank you. I'll pause here, and then I think I'll take other questions later.
Thanks, Raju. Yeah, thanks for bringing out the complexity. It is complex, and I firmly believe that if anyone can solve for it, it is people like you. You know, we need innovators, startups who can bring a very different lens to the problem than the conventional way of thinking about agriculture. I think you brought up a very important point in terms of solutions for smallholder farmers. I totally agree with you. They are already stretched. So who's going to pay for it? I think that's a good question, and that keeps on coming very regularly in our conversation. You know, so I think one thing which I believe here we have not invented ourselves enough is in terms of building fair trade supply chains. I think India is at that juncture where we should think about it. At least the leading food brands. The question is, you know, will consumer pay for products which are fairly traded? Again, it's a personal hypothesis. I believe a large section of consuming class, maybe top 20%, will pay for solutions which make supply chain more sustainable. You know, as a consumer, I don't know how much farmers share in the consumer prices. I don't know whether the product that I'm consuming, you know, is produced through a supply chain where this solution like yours is being adopted or not. So I think that narrative is missing. So we have to create the demand side of the story. You know, to make it really attractive, so that farmers start adopting it, and there is someone who can pay for it. Of course, it's a debatable topic, and we can discuss about it. But thanks very much, Rajul, for bringing out these very important discussion points. With that, I'll go back to Apurva. Rajul said we need to improve this adoption level from 4% to 40%. That's like a 10 times increase. What is the role of public ecosystem and policy? You know, that is so critical, and that's where you are so much involved. How these, how the policy, how the public ecosystem can potentially improve adoption of these solutions. For example, one thing which I keep talking about, climate capital. Why don't we have financial incentives for farmers who want to adopt these solutions? We incentivize farmers for timely payment of their loans. Their interest rate get reduced from 7% to 4% if they pay their farm loans on time. Why can't we build similar incentives for farmers who can adopt these climate resilient practices in terms of energy efficiency or water use efficiency? So it will be good to hear your thoughts. What are some of those initiatives that we can take?
Indeed, Hemendra, very, very important point. And I think I would want to frame it in the words that Jiten used. So none of the solutions that a startup comes up with or any other initiative comes up with can succeed unless there is a sort of bundling of that solution or that initiative with other solutions, other initiatives that ensure the right ecosystem for that. That can come from the policy system, that can come from any other driver, I would say. So let me take a quick example. For example, so we have been doing a lot of case studies recently to understand to understand what is driving scaling of successful solutions in the arena of in this nexus of agri, water, and energy. And one of the key success factors we indeed have noticed is exactly this: creating an entire ecosystem. Jitin mentioned that in another case we noticed there is a particular organization that is trying to take pesticide-free food to the market. So while that is its core proposition, and for that they need to engage with farmers to train them to start producing pesticide-free food. But their solution needs to be then supported by a lot of changes in ecosystem. So and that's what they are doing. And it seems like a best practice that they are working with their variety of potential supply chain partners who can then do aggregation, do storage in a way which allows which avoids cross contamination. They're trying to come up with providing evidence for their consumer. So certification, traceability that you just talked about needs to really sort of penetrate in Indian supply chains. If there is not enough policy enforcement on that front, maybe it is more self-governance from the industry that could come up. So this particular organization is then trying to come up with their own certification or own claim, and then providing their own evidence for the consumers by making the random testing and audit data available for them. So the point, the twofold point that I'm trying to say: one, ecosystem is important. You need to have that evidence, that traceability, that development of value chain that needs to happen along with the core solution that a startup is trying to bring in. But second point is that ecosystem may not come from the policymakers, and therefore there is importance of partnerships, and that remains essential to develop this ecosystem. So I'm giving it a bit of a different spin to your question by highlighting that ecosystem may not just come from government, but can be created from a very thoughtful partnership. And one thing about partnerships I would definitely want to mention is that this context of agriculture is very high risk setting. We are talking about sustainable. We are talking about smallholder farmers. Sometimes we are talking dealing with tribal population, and these all many of 55% of the farmers actually come from rain-fed region, which is sort of exposed to very high climate risk. So this is a very high risk setting, and therefore the partnerships need to happen with long-term perspective in mind, long-term horizon in mind, in a very and patient investment needs to come in, and that is only possible when there is alignment in terms of vision between different partners, and there is a lot of trust, so that then you can go through that churn together. So let me stop there on that comment, and we can follow it up with further questions.
Sure, Apurva. I think it's good that you mentioned about partnerships. It's as important as any policy perspective, especially in agri-tech. And since I work with most startups, I can tell you the startups who have been able to scale their solution, not necessarily in the climate space, but let's say in supply chain space and financing space and any possible segment in agri-tech, it's because of partnership. And partnership, when it comes to agri-tech, agriculture, it has to happen at multiple levels. The conventional business model is B2B2F, business to farmers. And the middle B is usually an industry or a corporate or an FPO, right? So I think that is one level of partnership. Then the second level of partnership, which Raju mentioned, the local village level entrepreneurs. I think they're so critical because, the farmers don't trust someone coming from a city and telling them what to do. Essentially, you need local youth who can become partners, right? So that becomes extremely important. Local FPOs, I think FPO ecosystem, all said and done, is growing now. There's so much of emphasis by the government to build about 10,000 FPOs, and I'm sure there's space for more. And typically, FPOs challenges, whether it's market linkage or good access to inputs or good financing or data and advisory. I think that is essentially what startups are trying to provide. And then I'm seeing also startups tying up with local Krishi Vigyan Kendras, local universities, local state governments, district administration. So yeah, there are, I would still say, empirical evidence. It's not really mainstreamed, but clearly partnership is the way to do, and that's where it's not about just tech innovation. It's all about business model innovation in this sector. Both has to go hand in hand. And with that, probably I'll go back to Jiten. Jiten, we are seeing some sort of white revolution too in India now, with so much of digitization of the dairy value chain, right from collection to processing to consumer. We are seeing consumer paying premium for good quality milk, right? 60 rupees a liter to 80 rupees a liter, like 20-30% premium to what Amul is selling and Mother Dairy is selling. We are also seeing increasing farmer awareness. A lot of farmers want to own more cattle, and especially the women farmers. So the market for cattle insurance, cattle loans is opening up. So in that context, someone like Promethean, who has so much of experience in the supply chain, but essentially on one part of the supply chain, as in on the chilling, cooling side, and essentially coming as a tech entrepreneur, how do you see these trends panning out for someone like Promethean? How Promethean, with deep understanding and expertise in the sector, can leverage some of these trends to scale the solutions, or build new business models?
Yeah, thanks, Hemendra. I think a critical aspect, as you pointed out, is business model innovation. We have many great solutions out. They're available and ready today. Apurva, I think one point I'll pick up on where you mentioned was long-term view and patient capital. I think if the policymakers can be enablers to business models that fit that category, I think that'll build new opportunities for what we believe are essential first mile infrastructure-led business models. So consumers are demanding clean, safe, higher quality premium products, which require proper infrastructure, cooling in the dairy sector, for example, transport and processing. And in order to do that, someone has to be ready to make investments that will pay off in the long run. And today, most business models and financing is meant for short-term gain. And that is sort of contradictory to the type of infrastructure that India really needs to empower smallholder farmers, empower the value chain in such a way that it's fair, that it's sustainable, and that other partners can join. So, for example, in the dairy industry, we know that currently Indian dairy farmers, smallholder farmers, are relatively inefficient. The average output per cow is much lower than it should be. We also know what the solutions are. So proper inputs, proper feed, fodder, proper nutrition, proper veterinary services, and support. And all of this needs to be done at the farm gate. And in order to do that, we need to set up models with clusters where these resources are made available. And those are investments that would be required. And what we like to see now, and what we're seeing as evidence, is if we build the physical infrastructure, we've seen a lot of push for digital business models, replacing physical business models. There's terms such as phygital, which what we believe is what is the right approach in the long run, where you have some common infrastructure at each village, which could be a cooling hub, it could be milk or produce or both. Farmers accessing those services, accessing the ecosystem alongside the cooling service, whether it's finance, insurance, inputs, and access to market. If the entire ecosystem came together, agreed upon the common sort of resources needed at the farm gate, we could come up with multiple models that could be deployed relatively quickly. And I think what we need at this stage is more demonstrations in clusters to prove that these models are viable, that they're repeatable, and then find the right financing partners. And I think those financing partners are also ready if the models can be demonstrated and then replicated. And just to answer your question, Hemendra, I think the dairy industry is going through lots of evolution. Consumers are really demanding better quality milk. And in order to do that, we need to rethink the dairy supply chain. And there's a good number of dairy companies and dairy startups who are starting to do that. Whether it's organic milk production, whether it's clean, antibiotic-free milk production, cooling at the source and cooling throughout the supply chain obviously is there. And if we can provide the traceability elements so consumers know that this is how their milk has moved through the supply chain, they'll be able to see that this is the difference between good quality milk and some of the milk that they're currently have access to. And the solutions are available. We can implement them relatively quickly. It's a matter of sort of will and the right partners and business models so that we have sort of safe milk for our own country and consumption, but also for exports as we try to improve that aspect of our supply chain.
Thanks, Jiten. I think good you talked about traceability. I think this is, I think, one of the least understood concept in the context of food supply chain. Most of the people relate it to the origin where the product is coming from, but there's so much more to traceability. It's about food safety, food nutrition, the trust between the producer and the farmer, the producer and the consumer. I think all those are very important elements. And again, what Raju said, who's going to pay for it? Again, we have already seen, at least in milk, consumers paying premium of 20%, 30% for milk which is certified safe, and these are usually self-certification. It's not that the third party is certifying it. So clearly, there's someone who's willing to pay for the technology, right? So I think if milk can demonstrate it at least to some level, why not other food supply chains? So I think that's so critical, and I would really want to see someday traceability also capture how much water has gone into producing the food, how much energy is being consumed, and some sort of certification that it is a from a climate perspective, it has used the optimal amount of resources, not excess resources. I think if we can get to that level and that level of consumer awareness, I think we can really transform the way food supply chain works. So great, Jiten, for bringing those points. I'll go back to Rajul. Rajul, you talked about smallholder farmers. One very fundamental question to you: do farmers really care about water? Because it's mostly it is freely available, right? It may not be good for the crop. It may still, more water doesn't mean more crop. In fact, it can reduce the productivity. But do farmers really care about conserving water? And if yes, what are the modes of water conservation they typically use? And you also mentioned about nutrients. I think that's also very important element, because soil nutrition is another big challenge that we are facing with distorted NPK ratios and micronutrients really going down and soil becoming acidic or alkaline and stuff like that. So what is farmer perspective on it? How do they see these resources and they really have a mindset to conserve it? If yes, how we can go about doing that?
Yeah. So here, Hemendra, if you have to talk about farmers, there are again two types of farmers. So cash crop farmers definitely are worried about how much water is going because it is directly affecting the productivity, how much nutrient. They are very careful. But then there are the small holding farmers. They are already so stressed out. So let's assume that they are not really bothered. So whatever my feedback is that they don't care how much water because they think more water, more crop, or whatever they leave the pump on over irrigation. They don't understand that. I mean, I'm not saying the farmers do not understand, but it's just that our irrigation. I would not even blame the farmer. Our whole irrigation management plan is missing. I mean, how many of them are using drip irrigation? I mean, how many of them are using sprinklers, knowing that they are very water efficient, but we are still using, even though the drip irrigation are subsidized, there are a lot of problems with the farmers using even the drip irrigation. What if the drip blocks? Who is going to service it? I mean, they just use it for a year and then maybe they'll throw it even if it is subsidized. So I feel that you also mentioned about price, and Jitan gave an example, or you also gave an example of the consumer is ready to pay. So similarly, I feel that currently the farmer is not so bothered because what if he actually puts extra effort? There was a report I read that there were two farmers adjacent fields to each other. One was actually doing very precise irrigation and all that, and other one is just wasting water. But this farmer doesn't get any additional benefit or additional points from the farmer. Why should even he bother about it? So that is where we have to think about that. Generally, the government, if I had to say in terms of MSPs, if I take the marginal farmers and growing some standard crops, if we talk about MSP, government pays 1.5 times of the input cost. If the government themselves say that we are ready to pay 2x times or whatever, initially some increment price we are ready to pay, provided you are adopting precision agriculture or you are trying to adopt those practices. Now, something what we don't understand, or everybody is also looking at very faster solutions and faster turnaround time. As technology use, if you are using the technology today, we'll get the results tomorrow. It doesn't happen that way. So Europe and all, where the technology, Netherlands, it took lot many years for them to get the technology matured, and we are just. So in that case, in initial time, it might happen that when farmer is using the precision agriculture or about conserving water, he is adopting the technology. It may happen that his productivity may go down, right? But is somebody ready to pay that additional price so that the farmer doesn't suffer? And unfortunately, what happens? Every startup, everyone is trying to exploit the farmer. I mean, they are just trying to sell something to the farmer, whether it is a pesticide, whether it is a fertilizer, whether it is some kind of an equipment. And that's why this whole adoption is taking a problem. I mean, I feel that if farmer knows that if they use this technology, if we can show, and if we can, even if when the technology, it will take, it is not that in the first season itself, we see like a research papers. See, in a research paper, I can show that to use this technology and you have so much of saving in water and so much increase in productivity. But there are so many other factors which are again interdependent. So the farmer is made. I mean, if something like that, if his productivity goes down, and even then the government is going, or somebody, some customer or some foundations are ready to pay that additional burden or additional thing, then I think farmers are ready to take this technology, because I am working with some marginal farmers in Gujarat, and they are quite, I would say, interested to learn how to use these moisture meters and how to use it. Even the women farmers are adopting it. And I'm so happy to say that one more thing which I want to bring in about the farmers when we are talking about, we should also talk about women farmers. And this is little bit, example not connected to agriculture, but I would just talk about women and men thing in common. Being a woman, we are ready to adopt. We actually move from one house to the other house, and then from the second day we start adopting that family. And similarly, if we bring in more women in policy making, and we bring more women in this farming, unfortunately the decisions are not given to the women in agriculture. It's the decisions, even though the women are laborers, are working in the farming, the decisions are made by men. So if the women are made to make these decisions, I think the precision agriculture and the technology adoption will become a little bit faster. That is my gut feeling. So that is what I would say about the adoption of this technology.
Thanks, Rajul, and thanks for bringing the gender lens. And I always say when we say farmer, we think of a man. Typically, that's the picture. But again, in my experience, Indian agriculture is much more feminine than most of us think. Especially sectors like dairy, which is largely women-driven. Horticulture is becoming more and more feminine, especially the vegetable crops. And I think, as Apurva mentioned, if we get more mechanization into the sector, it's quite possible even the crops which need masculine labor, like cereals, paddy, and wheat, they can also become more feminine if there are, those devices and equipments available. So absolutely right. I think you are spot on. We need to bring a gender lens, not just to policy, but also the way we innovate. I think a lot of devices are not made with women farmers as the target customer. So I think that's a very important point that you mentioned. I think point you mentioned on drip irrigation, I can tell you it's a double-edged sword. Of course, it's great, it consumes water, but since it's subsidy driven, it makes it a bit more challenging because different states have different track records on how the subsidy got transferred to the manufacturer of the drip irrigation equipment, and that's why it really couldn't penetrate beyond 5-10% of the total potential which is available for drip irrigation. So again, there's a huge linkage between the policy and these innovative devices that we see on the ground. Apurva, do you want to come in? I think another important parameter on climate resilience is also crop rotation. And there's so much of talk of a crop rotation policy that we should have less sugarcane and we should have less paddy, which are water guzzlers, and probably replace it with maize or millets, which are extremely water efficient. And I think some of these experiments have been done in some parts of the country, not to a large success. But what's your view? How do we build a narrative around crop rotation that is so critical, given the fact that our natural resources are not equally distributed across the country?
Yeah, indeed. Changing farmer behavior is one of the toughest, is at the core of, I think, driving sustainability in this nexus. Not only because, as Rajul pointed out, the incentives need to be right. So the question was whether they are willing to use less water or whether they care. I think they start caring as soon as there are clear incentives for them to care about them. Sorry, I lost the train. The question. What was the question, Hemendra?
I was talking about crop rotation. As a mechanism to conserve natural resources. Replacing some of the water guzzler crops like paddy and sugarcane with lesser millets. Of course, there's a demand side story and there is a lot of issues around that. But do you see that working? Do we need to think about it? Do we need to have a policy initiative on how do we rotate crops so that we conserve our natural resources?
Right. So that's why I was talking about the incentive structure. Incentive structure is important to actually make it work and then shift the farmer behavior, and also remains at equally at the core of the problem is the political economy around agriculture in India. So both needs to be, I think, understood very deeply, and then the strategies can only work if you're ensuring all the right things to shift both the farmer behavior as well as the political economy, because there would be some losers in the process that need to be they need to be addressed. Obviously, it would be naive to imagine that we can have a win-win scenario. But yes, so there are two dimensions of it. So let me tackle one by one quickly. In terms of farmer behavior, if very simplistically talking, there have been some experiments across India, and the success has been mixed. So in certain parts of India, for example, let me talk about the Odisha Millet Mission, which seems like a success story, where there was a thorough effort by government and the development sector, and an entire gamut of interventions were planned. So including assured procurement via public distribution system of millets, and the transition support that was provided to the farmers in terms of different payments. So all that set of interventions then has successfully led to a shift in production pattern towards more millets. Also, there was a lot of demand creation to ensure an assured market. Government worked with different institutes to build new recipes and promote those millet recipes and their consumption in the larger population. So this seems like a more significantly success case. The other success case I would say is the Sikkim Organic Mission, where government had pushed organic. Really banned any fertilizer chemical use and moved every farmer to organic production. Again, a very thorough or holistic set of interventions were brought in. Government came in, assured prices and procurement for priority crops that they identified. But also, what has helped is the existing status. So both Odisha and Sikkim have already had a significant population that were following relatively more sustainable practices. So they were still more tribal population and following and consuming not very high intensity of fertilizer and not significantly affected by the green revolution based agricultural regime. So that also is an important sort of factor of behind the success, and that's why the success in Punjab has been a bit limited, because it's heavily influenced by the green revolution based agricultural regime, and the political economy is now sort of locked in that, and the similar interventions that have worked in Odisha, etc., will have to be then tailored for that setting. A few initial steps have been seen. I think we are aware in Haryana, where the payment is being given to farmers for changing their behavior and start producing something other than rice and things like that. There are some initial. So I've not actually looked at the data, but what I hear is that potentially, there is potential of some solutions like that to work. But yeah, so political economy, especially in green revolution focused regions, would remain a challenge, and more sophisticated strategies would be required to actually create a roadmap for the transition to happen. Let me stop there, and then let's look for clarifications.
Sure, Purno, that's absolutely right. I think farmer looks for incentive, and you have to cover their costs. Either we have some insurance products. Again, that's another subject of discussion. How do we build insurance cover for farmers who adopt some of these new techniques, new crops? And I think that's another area where we are seeing a lot of innovations already, thanks to data and digitization, which is happening in the supply chain. Jiten, I want to come back to you with a very specific question. When it comes to energy, there's so much of emphasis on renewable energy, especially solar energy, wind energy. Do you see, or do you have examples of these being adopted at scale in any of the agriculture economics across the world? And are these viable solutions from an agriculture sector perspective? Of course, they have multiple other sectors to look at, but is renewable energy a viable option for Indian agriculture?
Yes, absolutely. I think just even speaking to India specifically, you can see a significant amount of food loss across the supply chain, limited in dairy, more so in fresh produce. You can see suboptimal transportation due to inability to store. If you bring the proper infrastructure to the farm gate with solar renewable energy, or in our case, thermal storage or energy storage solutions, at a minimum, you can reduce transportation, ensure food is preserved and taken to the right market at the right time. This alone, we calculate for each village could reduce roughly 10 tons of carbon per year. So these solutions are already available, and they could be deployed by reducing food loss, by minimizing transportation, by reducing the amount of diesel used in the supply chain. There's significant opportunity for sustainability. And you're starting to see that in some other countries, especially in the transport side. And then especially also now that we're seeing more rise of e-commerce and home delivery, you're starting to see that also in distribution and in cold storages. So over time, if you apply that same sort of evolution to the first mile, you can bring in the same types of efficiencies and then also bring in many other positive effects and opportunities for smallholder farmers. So I think we need to replicate some of these other models, but bring them into a more micro first mile level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned it you captured it really well. I think micro and first mile, I think that is the way to go. And that's where I think there will be a lot of learnings for players who are in the industry who try to build larger sizes, not necessarily meant for village level collection, stuff like that. So I think that's so critical. And we are seeing not just in dairy, but also in horticulture now, a lot of mobile picking stations. And I think that is doing a great job. And even storage solution as low as 20,000 rupees and using some innovative technique, not necessarily expensive cold storage solutions. I think they picked up quite a bit. So yeah, I think there's a huge scope for grassroots innovation and integrating renewable energy as a source of energy to make it really efficient and also affordable to farmers. Raju, we have 3 minutes to go. Any last word from you? What are 2 or 3 things that you would like to see change in next 5 years? So that we can get closer to a water efficient country as far as its use of water in agriculture is concerned.
Okay, so two points. I think one is I would connect to Apur when we are asking about crop rotation. So one is that in last 7 months in this year 2021, we have actually exported 4,500 billion liters of water just when you take only rice export. So if that is the kind of export we are doing, we are actually exporting such an important resource. So something we have to look about it there. Second, when we talk about traceability, what Jiten is talking about and marginal farmers, all this traceability needs sensors, right? You have to have sensors everywhere. Even for the milk quality, I mean, you can have a sensor and give it to the client so that he knows what the nutrition, instead of your certificate, he himself can actually test it. So we have to promote those kind of technology, the indigenous sensor technology. Unless we have our own those technologies, we really cannot talk about all these affordable for marginal farmers. It will just remain as a talk, I suppose. So these are 2 things. And the third thing I want to tell is that the investors, the government, the foundations, everybody should look at that. Things will take time. The countries in Israel and Netherlands took some time. So please be patient. Please support these innovations, technologies, so that they can actually make a difference. People who are really trying to make a difference will be able to make a difference provided they get proper support. These are the things I would say, because all these are very important for any solution we want to adopt. Indigenous technology development has to happen here at affordable cost.
Right, Raju. Absolutely right. I think patient capital and passionate entrepreneur. Without this sector is going to go nowhere. So I'm totally with you. And on your point on sensors, I think there's estimate that agriculture will probably have more sensor than all other sectors put together. So I really hope we build those kind of sensors and adoption goes up, and they really serve a purpose. Essentially, how do you convert all these technologies into a decision-making tool, right? So it's not just about capturing data, but what do you do with it, right? So I think that's also important. How do you transmit it to farmers and other value chain players? So I think this lot has been discussed to be almost out of time now, and I wish if we had more time, but I think it's a great start to the conversation. I sincerely hope that TIE will build on this dialogue, and we can hopefully do some very meaningful intervention given TIE's huge network and influence in policy making and supporting entrepreneurship. So with that, I thank all the panelists, Apur, Jiten, and Rajul. Thanks very much for some wonderful points and very, very open and frank discussion. Thanks very much. And I hand it over back to Balaji.
Thank you very much, panelists. Thank you very much, Hemendra, for a wonderful, conversation and giving us ideas and spotlight on certain very important things. And I think as we move forward, I'm sure a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at this area and are inspired by your pointers, your discussions. And thank you once again for all of us being here. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.